Okay, I'm Spirit Williams, and I've been carving for 35 years, and this is a cherry door I started 12 years ago. It took me about 6 weeks to carve it. It's in cherry, native cherry, and I wanted to show how beautiful a door can be if you're given a free hand. My specialty is relief carving. Relief carving is, by definition, any carving that stands out in relief from the background. So you can have very low relief, which is called bas relief, and you can have very high relief, which is called haut relief. This is an example of high relief, and this. See, when you get undercutting like this, where you go way underneath, that's called high relief. Bas relief is where there is no undercutting at all, and it is what is used in friezes on buildings, because you can't have any place where water can collect on exterior carvings. So this is a carving. It's the second one with this design. I liked the design so much that I did it again on my own spare time. Got a little obsessive compulsive about the little grasses. I carved every grass blade and little flowers in the grasses. But that's what I like to do. And the nice thing about relief carving is that it is all illusion. You have to create the effective depth without that much real depth. And so that's fun for me, to create the illusion. I do statues, like this little bird. And I've done The Last Supper, which was all statues, of course. And I've done a life-size ferruginous hawk, which has wings as long as my arm. But, and I enjoy doing the statues, but my first love is relief carving. I like to create that illusion. A long time ago, somebody wanted a carving of an eagle, and I really could not do it as cheaply as they needed it done, and in relief. And then I thought, well, if I didn't have to take the time to move the background, then I could do the carving. So I started doing these, which I called cutouts for a long time because I cut them out, and have since called them semi-relief or semi-round, because they're not in relief because they have no background, but they're not in the round like a statue. So, but they're a lot of fun. You use the same techniques as you do for relief to create the illusion, but you don't have to spend all that time moving background. So that's one way to do it. And then when I teach, people always seem to want to do statues instead of relief, and so I do teach little animals, because that's something that you can do in about 6 hours, and so you can feel like you've accomplished something. And then over here I have birds that I've done, and you run into problems sometimes. For one thing, for instance, this bird is it's designed to hang against the wall, so it's flat on one side. But even so, it's more than 6 inches across, and wood does not dry once it gets to more than 6 inches thick. So I had to add this wing. You can't use wood that might be wet in the middle. So when you get to that big, you have to start gluing stuff on. And you run into problems, like I carved this hummingbird and then had no way to hang it, so I carved the flower and put it up that way, and then touched it and it broke off. So then I had to mount it on a background. So you learn little by little what works, what doesn't work, and how to make adjustments and fix mistakes. And then this eagle, most carvers use metal feet for their birds, but I carved the feet, and that one was fun. And again, the wings had to be attached because of the size. To start carving, I always feel that carving is one of the oldest arts in the world, because if you think about when we were hunter-gatherers and when hunters were going through the woods, they would blaze trees to mark their trail. And if 3 hunters blazed a tree, at the same tree, then the next person coming along would say, well, that's a face, 2 eyes, a mouth. And they would start carving. So I'm sure that wood carving has been with us just about as long as we've been able to mark wood at all with any kind of tool. So what you need to carve wood is anything that's harder than the wood that has an edge. So you can do it with flint, In Africa, they carve ebony with pieces of glass. You just need something that's hard and sharp. So any kind of knife will do. I've been using one of these little hobby knives for 35 years, and I find that it is more effective in more jobs than anything else that I've found for very fine, tiny detail. And it also teaches you a lot about carving because it is so small and so fine. Because if you make a mistake, then it lets you know right away. It will break, or it will turn and cut you, or, excuse my cat, nosy. So you need, first of all, a knife. But eventually you're going to find you want to do more. You want to move more wood. This will only move so much wood at a stroke. If you try to move too much, the blade will break. So eventually you'll want to go to a heavier tool. When I first started carving, I didn't know anything about wood carving. I went to the library and got a book on carving, and when I opened the book that I found, the first sentence said, if you cut yourself more than twice, you should quit. So I put the book back on the shelf and didn't look at another book for a long time, even though I'm a reader as a rule, but that I had cut myself so many times to begin with until I learned what caused the pain and bleeding and figured out what not to do. So I went, and I knew that carpenters used chisels, so I got a chisel. And my first one was actually just one of these that you get in any hardware store. And I used that for a long time. I used only a hobby knife for a year, and then I used a chisel. Finally, a friend felt sorry for me and got me a gouge. A gouge is curved. The problem with any straight edge is that no matter how you angle it, you're always going to drag one corner, and that is not efficient. But with a curve, you only present the cutting edge. You don't put in the dull corners. You only put in the cutting edge, and that's efficient. So you'll end up with a whole lot of gouges. Now, there are different kinds, of course. It becomes natural that you have different sorts of gouges for different jobs. This is called a straight gouge. And this is called a fishtail, because it's shaped like a fishtail. And this is called a bent gouge. And then when your gouge gets so deep that it forms a U shape, it stops being a gouge and becomes a veiner. Now, when you realize that the whole point of using a gouge is to have only the curved part going into the wood, a veiner lets you go very deeply into the wood without getting those corners in. And so this gives you a lot of options. So you'll notice that here I have 1 millimeter and 3 millimeter, 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch veiners, and then a 2 millimeter and a 5 millimeter straight gouge, a 3/4 inch fishtail, and a 1 inch, or no, this is probably 26 millimeter bent gouge. Okay, so that's how wide they are. But there's another very important part about a gouge, and that's how deep it is. We've already said that the veiner is U-shape, and that's a number 11. A chisel is a 0. So we have a 0, and then this slight curve is a 3. This slightly deeper is a 5. This slightly deeper is a 7. The deeper it is, the more wood you move. The more wood you move, the less control you have, and the more control the wood has. So when you're first learning, it's best to use a 5 because you get a good amount, but not so much that you can't easily control it. And this is only 3/8 of an inch about wide. And so you can always take 2 cuts, but you can't take a 1/2 a cut. So it's always better to use a smaller tool, especially when you're first starting. So, and of course, with the chisels, there are many different kinds of chisels also. There are the standard carpenter's chisel, which has a bevel, just one bevel. And then there's a firmer chisel, which has a bevel on both sides. And then there's a skew chisel, which is slanted like this. And for a long time, I didn't understand what the point of a skew chisel was. But then when I was in a tight position in a carving one time, I found out that it's really basically a knife on the end of a stick, and you can get it into places that you just can't get any other tool in. So, And then there's a new kind of tool out now that's very thin, and this lets you do some really fine work that the really heavy carpenter's chisel doesn't let you do. And there are a lot of other tools. Basically, whenever you run into a problem in carving, somebody else has run into that problem, and they made a tool to solve the problem. So you can have, I have probably 5 times as many tools as this tucked away for special occasions, and there is also a V-shaped tool, which I don't use except for special occasions because they're hard to sharpen. But anyway, that's your basic arsenal. And I made a living for 10 years with just these tools, just these 4 tools: a gouge, a knife, a chisel, and a mallet. So you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on a lot of tools, but you do have to have a gouge. And of course, a lot of people just use a knife. Now you might say, what is this, and why did I call it a mallet? It looks like a potato masher. But the reason that sculptors use a mallet like this is because when you're carving, you're not looking where you're hitting. You're looking where you're carving. So if you use a regular hammer, which is an irregular shape, you end up hitting yourself a lot, and it hurts. But this, because it's round, you can feel the middle, and you don't have to look. You can just be working. If I'm carving here, and I can reach out and grab this and do this without ever looking away from my carving. So that's why sculptors use a sculptor's mallet. When I'm teaching, I always tell people you have to stand it up. And if they lay it down, I'll tell them twice, 3 times, and then I'll let them know why you stand it up. It hurts to have this thing land on your foot. So, after you've gotten your tools, then you need to talk about wood. There are a lot of different kinds of wood, and I'm often asked, what is the best kind of wood to carve? And I said, well, it depends on your approach to life. If you really, really want to learn to carve, you will carve pine, because pine is so awful that if you can carve it, you can carve anything. Pine has a hard, soft alternating grain, so when you try to pull a knife through it, your knife goes tink, 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 tink. And so to get a nice smooth cut, you have to learn control, you have to understand grain, and so once you've learned that, then when you go to any other kind of wood, it's easy. But a lot of people don't have the patience to stick with carving pine because it's so awful. So the easiest wood to carve is basswood. Basswood is from the linden tree. The reason we call it basswood is because when the pioneers first came to America, they found the Native Americans using the inner bark of linden trees to make thread and cordage. And an old-fashioned word for thread and cordage is bast, as in a basting thread. So they called it a bast tree, meaning thread tree, but it's too hard to say bast tree. So it became basswood. They dropped the T, it became basswood. And it's that thready quality that makes it a good carving wood. First of all, it's soft. It's soft enough to mark with your thumbnail. But where other woods will split on the grain, basswood has a thread that goes across the grain, and it tends to resist splitting and splintering. So you can do things like feathers and petals and eyelids and work really fast and have fun and not have to worry about the wood splintering on you. Pine, for instance, splinters badly. Red oak splinters very badly. So when people say, oh, you carve basswood because it's soft, no. Actually, it's a little softer than most carvers would like it to be. But carvers carve it because it tends to resist splitting and splintering. It's probably 5 times as strong as walnut because of that resistance. Now, other woods to carve, there are many other kinds of wood you can carve. This is butternut. It's a beautiful wood. When you finish it with oil, it has a golden sheen, and it's almost buttery. I don't know, there must be oils in the wood or something, but it's very nice to carve. It will splinter somewhat, but it's a nice wood to carve. Walnut is okay to carve, but for relief carving, which is my favorite thing, it's really too dark, because half of a relief carving is the shadowing, which gives the effect of depth, and the dark walnut just absorbs the shadows, so it just looks like a black blob. So your lighter woods will always come out nicer for relief carving. But cherry is nice. It has a nice fine even grain. White oak is very hard, but it has a good grain, so you can carve detail in it. Red oak tends to splinter and is very unstable, and I don't like it. but I have carved it on occasion. Mahogany, I think, is a very bland wood, but it's carvable. Basically, you can carve any wood if you're determined enough. Even ebony, which is extremely hard, or Osage orange, which is extremely hard, you can carve them. It takes some adjustment if you've been carving basswood to switch to cherry or Osage orange, but can be done, and it just takes a certain amount of persistence. And when you get into a splintery wood, you have to work more slowly and take smaller, shallower cuts so that you don't stress the wood so much that it splits and splinters on you.